Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerdic Steve, and today I'm hanging out with Zach Baru. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good, thanks. Yeah, all good. Doing well. I'm
And,
very happy to be on.
we brought you on to talk about Animon Story. It's an RPG you've created, and recently one of our writers, Stephen Partridge, did an article over on the website. And I probably should have put that down in the description. But you'll find other links to go check out Zach and Animon's story down there to take a look. But if you'd be so kind of introduce yourself and kind of tell people about you a little bit.
Sure, absolutely. I'm Zach. I am an RPG writer and designer. I've been doing sort of RPG writings for a few years, but Animon Story was the latest sort of big thing, and the first kind of thing I released by myself. Um, and it is an original TTRPG which is inspired by Pokemon and Digimon and like those uh, shows or games which are basically all about like kids and their monster friends. There's a few other ones which are a bit more obscure, like uh, the thoughts escape me. Dinosaur King and like Monster Rancher was a video game series, and there's all these ones that have quite a dedicated sort of little niche fan base. But yeah, Digimon and Pokemon obviously the biggest kind of ones in the public. And yeah, the TTRPG was all about that. It's all about you make a kid character, you make a monster companion for yourself as well, that has different abilities. They can evolve as you play the game as well. All of the things that you'd expect, like elemental types and all that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, it's very very focused on that core idea of the kids and monsters.
And
Um,
what made you decide to create this RPG? Just a fan of the genre. Was there any like specific thing that lended inspiration to you?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I am a massive fan of those sorts of things. I love anything with like I just really like the fantasy of having your own kind of amazing monster companion, whether it's more like a pet or like a friend, whatever. Um, I really like that. I've always liked that as I was growing up. I really liked that. Um, but as it sort of as I got more and more into RPGs, I always wanted to play or run an RPG where you could do that. And I suppose that there are RPGs where there's elements of that, where you might have familiars or like animal companions or things like that. And I've also seen a few sort of fan games for Digimon or Pokemon around online, but I've always wanted something that just hit the kind of vibe of a game that I really wanted. So I ended up making one myself. And as it developed more and more, um, I just sort of saw the opportunity to take it further and fully flesh it out and release it as a game for others as well. Um,
Do you have like a target audience in mind when you're writing this game, or was this kind of like you were doing it for yourself? This is what I want to play.
I think always in my mind whilst I was making it uh, was other people like myself, mostly I would say, like probably who grew up playing Pokemon on Game Boy and have played the games since then, or watching the anime series on TV. Because I was fairly confident there was a group of people out there with the same kind of interest in that specific subgenre of whatever it is. But also, I think it's still a fairly popular, particularly with Pokemon, obviously, which is still massive and probably only getting bigger. I thought that it would be something that would be open to kids as well. And so I don't think I designed the game specifically with like a child audience in mind, but I would like to think that it's open to that as well. You could play it with kids as well if they're into that. Um,
Yeah, I guess the reason why I ask is because when I look at something like that, I do think of kids oftentimes because they seem to really enjoy the pet aspect of games.
yeah,
And even like when Monica Games put out their game for kids, No Thank You Evil, like the premise behind that game was to, everyone gets a companion, whether it's a
yeah,
dinosaur, a robot, or something.
yeah. I think I think there's two parts of it. I think that can attract people and particularly be quite fun for kids. Whether it's like the idea of having like this pet, which is your best friend, and it's something that's unique to you. A lot of these things like Pokemon and Digimon or plenty of others, even like I guess slightly less related things like Yu-Gi-Oh, for instance, like
Yeah.
you could have that one monster that was kind of like yours. And then I suppose there's another side which ties into just the the collection addiction. Like you
Yeah.
would have to catch all of the Pokemon or whatever. Which I have to say, Animon Story as a game doesn't. You don't go around catching loads of monsters. You just kind of have the one which is your unique companion. But I think both of those sides lead to the genre being quite appealing for lots of people. And that's probably why there's so many trading cards of things like that, because you fill your binder full of trading cards of every single one you can find.
That, when I look at something like this, like, I kind of like think about those kid shows and that kind of media. But then also like it's got me thinking because more recently I had watched a show called His Dark Materials, and like all the
Yeah,
characters in that show have these things called demons, and they're really just like animals that kind of can
yeah.
talk, and they're like familiars that have a bond to the character. So there's probably some other directions that maybe you haven't even thought about that people could take this as well.
There are lots of like different variations you could find if you look a bit harder at something that you've like. His Dark Materials has come up before when I was talking to someone as like you wouldn't necessarily immediately think of it, but actually it does make sense because in that, although I'm not sort of super familiar with it, I believe that the kind of magical animal companions they have are either tied to them or tied to their spirits or something. Like they're very personal and unique things.
Yeah.
um, and I think, well, as a game, you obviously kind of create these two characters. You create a human kid character and you create an Animon, like the monster companion. um, so I think ultimately you could kind of push that in any direction where you have a human character and something which is very personal. Like I'd even thought if you really wanted to push it further, you could almost do like a Gundam, like where instead of an animal companion, you use that kind of secondary character to represent like a mech suit or something like that, where it's like a very personal, unique thing. Everyone has their own thing. But I don't know. I've never tried running the kind of a mech type game using the Animon Story system. Is mainly for the monsters, obviously, but yeah, I think it would it would work. Also, I think if you played as like mages with wizards familiars or anything like that, it's kind of that sort of thing as well. Um,
So I think we kind of get the gist of what the game, like what the game's about. But what about the system and the mechanics?
sure.
What is the core mechanic for the system?
It is based on a D6 pool system, which is something that I enjoy quite a lot. I like playing D6 pool games. Um, and it basically works in terms of like you have various um, things on your character sheet which would add to your pool of D6s. If you're better in a certain situation, you have talents and things like that. You would build up a pool of D6s, which is normally between like 1 and 5, probably. Um, Maybe more as you've got to higher levels. You roll them and then you count successes rather than adding up the actual numerical values. You count which dice are successes. and then you total up your number of successes, and that's your pass or fail, depending on how difficult the task is that you're doing. So yeah, that's
Do you
it.
use botches?
What's that?
Do you use botches?
There's what, like kind of fumbles or like.
So in other dice pool systems I've seen, which I actually kind of hate this mechanic, is like if you roll a one, it's considered a botch, so it has a negative
Yeah,
effect. And but the problem with dice pool systems that use that kind of mechanic is, in theory, the better you are at something, the more likely you are to get botches.
sure. Yeah. No, there isn't anything like that in this. And it is partly like you said, like uh, when you're working with a dice pool, you have to think about what happens when you add more dice. Like
Yeah.
you want that to mean you're getting better, obviously. But also it works in the other way. Like I early on in the design, there was like exploding sixes essentially. So if you rolled a
Yeah.
six, you could roll another dice. And I just realized very quickly that
It gets obnoxious.
it gets way too much. Like especially
Yeah.
because I started to designing the
But
game
that's the
from
part
the
we like.
perspective. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you do like rolling loads and loads of dice, and I like that too. But that I wanted there to be a limit to that because at some point it can just get too much, and you don't want to stop for like half an hour every time you have to make a roll to sort of resolve everything. But yeah, it's basically in a standard roll, every dice that has 4, 5, or 6 counts as a success. So you roll a certain number of dice, and then you're counting 4 and up on those dice. So it's in some ways a bit more similar to like a war game kind of dice system from that perspective. Like I always think of like Warhammer and things like that when you roll a bunch of d6s and count successes, but it works quite nicely because I quite like the feeling of something on your character sheet that is like a talent that you have or something. You're like, okay, because I'm good at this, I get to chuck an extra dice into the pool, and there's something that's quite satisfying about that to me, as opposed to just adding a modifier onto a roll that you're doing.
Yeah. The nice thing about a D6 dice pool is that even if you're not a tabletop role playing game enthusiast, you probably still have D6s.
Yeah.
Although the way you described the dice pool, it could have been coin flips.
Well, there is that. Although I do find coins, if you had to flip 5 coins in a row, it probably might be a little more awkward than rolling the dice.
Yeah.
But then
Well, I was just saying because it's a 50-50 pass fail.
there is something in the dice in the game called boost and setback, because something that I really like in D&D 5th edition was the advantage and disadvantage. When running with that, I just, as a GM, I really liked the ability to go, okay, there's something bad, so you get this, or there's something good, so you get this, to just very quickly modify a roll. And in Animon Story, there's something that has a similar function called boost and setback, which is rather than rolling twice or anything, if you have a boost, which is improving your chances, you count all dice that show 3 and up as successful. And if you have a setback, you have to get 5 or 6 to succeed. So it actually changes what you need to roll.
Yeah, you've just totally destroyed my economy of using coins.
Yeah, that is the thing that doesn't quite work with coins. But there's also like some things that the characters themselves have that give boosts and stuff as well. So it plays around with that.
And is the system, is it like a class-based system, a skill-based system?
There's no classes, and there's no like strict set of skills either. Basically, you have some core stats, and there's different stats for the kid and for the Animon companion. There's 3 for the kid and 4 for the Animon, and then beyond that, basically everything that you put on your character sheet, you have a lot of control over. So rather than a list of skills that you put points into, you can write whatever you think your character is good at. Essentially, like the kids have their talents, which could be, I mean, anything you wanted, basically. So you could write singing if you wanted. If you wanted your character to be good at singing, or you could write that they're very sort of brave or anything like that as a talent, and then that gets a certain number of dice whenever it's relevant. And likewise, the Animon have these qualities which could be something more like what how they act or look, or like if they have metal plating, or if they have like a water cannon on their back, or anything like that. So because there's so much variation in the sorts of things you get, like the sorts of powers or abilities or whatever, I ended up just leaving it up to the players. You can write whatever you want, and then you assign a certain number of dice based on how powerful that ability is.
That makes me think of Mutants and Masterminds, kind of, where all your powers are effect based. So, like, it's more about what does the power do than how does it do it. If it's a damage power, then you would have a tag. If it's cold damage, it's fire damage, it's piercing damage.
Yeah, the Mutants and Masterminds is quite an interesting comparison, because in that, you have this massive range of things that you can put on your character, and it's more like how do you get to the end result is part of the character creation, rather than sort of picking specifically from a list.
I guess for superheroes game, it became to me it was a very like kind of elegant way of doing, instead of making a million powers, being like they're just descriptors.
Well, it's a similar thing, I suppose, with superheroes and with like monsters in a kind of monster companion story. Like, because if you started trying to define every power that every superhero has, like that's going to be a very long and arduous process. And similarly, like, well, just looking at Pokemon, there's 800 and something Pokemon, and if you think about every ability and kind of characteristic they all have, it's not going to work out very well if you try.
Your system would be volumes of books.
Yeah, exactly. So it's much more about, like, if someone's playing this game and creating their character, they could look at something that they like their favorite Pokemon, and go, okay, my favorite Pokemon is Bulbasaur. So I'm going to write down on my sheet that they have photosynthetic abilities because they're like a plant or something like that. So it's quite free form in terms of what you can actually write down. And then it's fairly simply translated into the number of dice that you add to certain rolls. Or
who did the art? Did you have multiple artists? One artist?
There's a couple of artists. The cover art was done by an artist called Kevin Hong. It's a really lovely cover art. I was so delighted with how it looks. And then the interior artwork, almost all of it, was done by a guy called Chris Caesar, who is someone I've worked with before on other things. And I think the artwork really kind of, I was very happy with how the artwork came out, because it kind of instantly reminded me of those 90s like cartoons that I watched and stuff like that.
I'm really digging on the website. I'm looking at there's this, like, it kind of looks like an owl or a falcon type creature with a cat head with like oversized ears, and it's just got a cyclops eye on its face, but then its wings full of eyes. I basically let the artist Chris come up with designs himself. Like, I was like, I want a monster that looks kind of planty, or I want a monster that's like a bird. and he just came up with these great designs that are sort of scattered throughout the book, which is awesome. Because every time he sent me a new bit of artwork, I was just ecstatic to see what design, and it kind of helps to illustrate the range of things that you can come up with as well. One of the things that you define about your monster, your Animon companion, is their broad categories, which is like whether they're like a beast
or like a bird, an avian, or aquatic, or insect, or there's all sorts of ones. And with the artwork, you can really see how that sort of makes them very distinct. And then you chuck an element on top of that, like fire or lightning or dark or light or anything like that, and you can create some really fun combinations, which
So
are shown.
I see a mention of kid types. What does that mean?
Oh yeah, actually, I was going to mention that when you mentioned class earlier, because it's probably the closest thing the game has to like classes, where you pick a kid type, which there's 10 of them in the book, and they are basically your classic, like almost stereotypical, like cliche character archetypes from the cartoons or games. So you've got like the bookworm, you've got the delinquent, and the jock, and you have all these different kid types which kind of influence that archetypical character that your kid is aligned with. And within that, you get a kind of type feature which makes you good in certain specific situations. Like, for example, the delinquent gets an improved role whenever they're standing up to authority or something like that. And then it has a whole bunch of suggestions for the sorts of talents and gear that you might have as that kid. But again, a lot of it is left up to the player to write whatever they want, and there's just a bunch of examples or suggestions in the book. But the kid types was really a way of really driving home the genre influence that was coming into the game from anime and from video games.
So Brian wants to know, is the combat usually 1v1 Animon versus Animon like the shows often are, or do the kids and the Animon each get a turn?
That's a good question. Yeah, generally it's like very much assumed that the kids don't get directly involved in the fighting. There's nothing to stop them from doing so, but generally the Animon have much better combat sort of capabilities, because you sort of are playing mostly children, so like your ability to go and punch a massive monster in the face isn't necessarily as good as your monster companion is, but it's sort of it works out like the kid and monster kind of technically go at the same time in combat, and often that might just mean that the kid is on the sideline kind of cheering on their companion or whatever, but also there might be something else going on that the kids have to deal with at the same time as a fight going on between the monsters. That happened quite a lot in Digimon in the anime, where the monsters would have to battle off some opponent whilst the kids were, trying to rescue someone or figure out something, a puzzle or something else on the sidelines. But yeah, it's not typical that the kids get involved in the brawling sort of personally.
So when you're creating this game, did you have is there like, a setting that's that goes along with the rule set, or is it kind of assumed that people are going to just play their own games with it, and making it kind of like more generic?
It's that's actually something that changed quite a lot throughout the course of the design, and the reason for it evolving was that I realized that most of the people playing this are probably going to have some show or game in this genre that it's their personal favorite, and that they might want to bring more influences from. So it ended up being quite generic in terms of the setting that it is put forward in the book. It says it sets sort of in the rules of the game, if you like, that the monsters of Animon Story are more sentient, like they can talk and interact, rather than being more like pets or animals. But other than that, there's a lot of kind of blank space left for people to fill in.
Yeah.
There's a set of questions that help you build a setting if you want to build a setting with your group, kind of as you're creating your characters. And there's a few example settings as well.
When you say it kind of evolved quite a bit when, as you're going through the process, does that mean you kind of started off with like a setting in mind, and then as you're going, you realize, oh, wait a minute, other people might not want to play
Yeah.
this one. That might not be their favorite show.
Yeah, exactly. When I started building Animon Story, the setting was much more heavily influenced specifically by Digimon, in that it was the idea was that the monsters would come from cyberspace, and they were like sentient computer programs essentially, which is very similar to Digimon. But as it went on, as I said, I realized that other people might want to make it more like their personal favorite thing or change it to be their own, as well as the fact that actually there wasn't really much in the mechanics of the game which tied it to specifically being computer programs or specifically being cyberspace. So it actually wasn't difficult to decouple the setting from the mechanics, because there wasn't really anything specific that meant that it had to be one setting or another. So it made a lot more sense to make it more versatile in terms of setting, and I'm happy that I made that choice at some point, because it just means that it's a lot more versatile, and it's going to be interesting to more people as well. It's already like a niche genre, and
Yeah.
I really didn't need to make it even more of a niche genre than that.
So Brian had another question. Do the Animon have evolution equivalents, or do they stay the same creature more or less and gain powers?
So this is one of the things which stayed a bit more similar to Digimon, actually, because the monsters do evolve. They have a handful of evolution stages that they can grow to, and as you level up in the game, from level 1 to 10 is the range, you unlock the ability to then stat out the new evolution level that you've just unlocked and give it new abilities, and decide how it looks and how it's different to the previous one and stuff. But in this, they always go back to their kind of smaller form after a fight has happened or after the action is over, essentially. So they always return back to that form, and then they can evolve again when another fight happens and so on. But rather than being a permanent thing, which is more like how it works in Pokemon, for example, the evolutions are more like temporary power-ups that
Or transformations that they do and then undo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that makes sense, especially like depending on how far you go into it. Like if this cute little critter that you usually travel with can turn into something that's 15 foot tall, massive, like it might lose that kind of aspect that people originally wanted for it.
I think so. I think there's a lot of reasons why I lent towards that and put that in the game and kind of prefer that personally. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that actually the small monsters, or the smaller ones, are tend to be a lot more personable, a bit friendlier looking, and they're more like you can more easily have like a relationship maybe, or a companionship, like because in Animon Story it's encouraged that the monsters have their own personalities and are characters on a level with the kids, rather than being just like fighting machines that you send out and battle with. I think it makes a lot of sense that you can always come back down to that slightly cuter, like smaller size of monster, and there's the practical element, as you mentioned as well, of if you're walking around with a dragon the size of an apartment block, then it's a little
unwieldy.
Yeah.
Brian also wants to know, do adults have Animons?
That is very much up to you in the setting. Like that, all of the kids, or rather, I should say, all of the characters, the human characters that players take on the role of, are kids by default in the book. But there's nothing to stop you from creating an adult based on one of the same archetypes. And there's nothing to stop you saying that adults have Animon companions in the story as well. I think the reason it's presented as kids as the main characters is because a lot of these games and shows are centered around kids as the main characters, and quite often have those kind of coming of age themes in them as well, you know, like where the adults are all irrational and don't know what they're talking about, and it's up to the kids to save the day.
What do you got planned in the future? Where are you going with this? Do you know?
That's a good question. I have plans. One of the things is making physical copies of the game available. Currently, it's just available as a PDF. And I'm currently looking at the best way to do physical copies, which I can say for certain will be available in the future in one way or another. I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out yet. Nothing is set in stone, but I'm working on physical copies. And then, as well as that, I'm looking at developing follow-up products like adventures, as well as like setting guides. I think would be really cool because the core book is quite generic on setting and just offers examples. I'd quite like to do a book that's a whole fleshed out setting with its own maybe different kid types related to whatever that setting is, and its own backstory and its own kind of context into which the characters are thrown. So those are the sorts of ideas I'm looking at the moment.
Steven says he would totally buy a physical copy.
That's good to know.
I feel like a lot of the people that buy the digital copy that are playing the game would probably buy it as well.
Yeah, I'm that sort of person who will buy it again if something comes out in physical as well.
So do you find there's communities kind of building up around your game?
I've been really amazed at the response. Considering I've never released anything as an individual before, I was blown away by how many people were excited about the game and have bought it, and you know, not only that, but actually have told me that they've played it or have sent me pictures of their Animon characters they've come up with, or you know, there's been a couple of actual play live streams that have taken up the game as well and started running campaigns. So yeah, I've really, there's a fair number of people out there who are into it. So if you're sort of looking to connect with other people who are into Animon Story, I would go on Twitter, maybe tag me in a tweet or something. I'll share it out, and you'll probably be able to find some other people who are interested in chatting about it. I think it probably is on account of the nostalgic kind of element of the game, and other people who are really into Pokemon and Digimon and the like, who want to take that to their tabletop, which is exactly what I wanted to do as well.
I feel like it's kind of a newer genre, right? I mean, it's been around for a while now.
Yeah.
But I mean, when you talk about storytelling as a whole, it feels like a newer genre, considering, you know, we've been telling stories for thousands of years now.
Yeah.
To go, this one's been around for the past like 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Feels fairly new.
Yeah, I think it's maybe I'm wrong on this. There might be other examples, and I'm welcome to corrections, but I think certainly the 90s, it grew out of like of virtual pets like Tamagotchi as well.
Mm-hmm.
Were like some of the first ones where you have a monster, and then I think Digimon was fairly early, they were like Tamagotchis originally, and then that got its anime series and video games after that, and then Pokemon was really big, and trading cards and all sorts, which built up on that idea. And more recently, I've noticed quite a lot of indie video games as well that kind of are playing on that same concept. So it feels like there's a bunch of people who grew up with it from the 90s and later on, and then now sort of starting to make their own things based on what they liked as a kid.
I mean, it kind of taps into like, and I don't know where this comes from, but I mean, it's something that's happens is kids will often create imaginary friends, right? And like,
Yeah,
so very much it feels like an extension of that
I
in a
think so.
way.
I think that's one of the reasons that I really like it, because it's kind of a unique way for a kid to express themselves. Like you say, as if a kid has an imaginary friend, um, or even a kid with like a pet, kids and pets, you can create a really strong bond there. Um, and if a kid is able to create their own perfect companion, like a monster that
Yeah.
has all their favorite animals kind of combined, or like has something that they really love, I think there's definitely that element. I suppose, particularly if you go back to, as I mentioned, like a Tamagotchi, it is basically like a little virtual pet companion, like an imaginary friend almost, so that you
Oh, there
take
was a
care of.
show my son used to watch. And it was like an orphanage of imaginary friends.
Yeah.
It's something, but I can't remember.
It's
Foster's
Foster's
Home for
Home of
Imaginary
Imaginary
Friends.
Friends.
I could definitely see doing a setting where like all the pets, all the monsters, spontaneously just come into existence for whatever reason because kids' imaginary friends start becoming real.
Yeah, that would be a great one. Actually, the that Foster's Home is quite a, I think, quite a good example of like a not an indirect link that you could do something with this game. Yeah, exactly. Like there's a part in the game which, if you're creating your own setting, it kind of asks you, well, where do the Animon come from? They could be sentient computer programs, or they could be fairy tale monsters. Like one of the ideas, which I think is quite fun, is if Animon come from another world and occasionally they have crept into the human world and they've been the cause of all sorts of fairy stories, or something like that is an option. Or um, imaginary friends, yeah, like they come from kids' imaginations essentially.
I mean, especially if you wanted to do a game and you were saying like only kids have Animon, that would very much be like the reason. And then you have to figure out what happens when kids stop believing in imaginary friends.
Yeah,
They
that
hit
could be
that
quite
age.
a dramatic story. As you grow up, you sort of start to lose this constant companion. That's quite an intense sort of situation you could have there.
So Stephen mentions the concepts of virtues and ideals in the system.
Hmm.
What are they about?
That is mainly another way of giving some definition to your kid character in particular. But a lot of the things that you define apply to the kid and the Animon, because they are meant to be, in a unique bond that kind of reflect one another. And the virtues that you can choose um, are just another kind of classic um, narrative thing that pop up in cartoons and games, where you have characters that represent these different ideals, like courage or friendship or knowledge or wisdom, or all sorts of things. You kind of have that brand as your character's unique perspective. They're the one that always comes in and makes sure that the group doesn't fall apart, or they're the one who's always willing to take the first step into danger. Or it gives you kind of your role within the group a little bit, the thing that everyone looks to you for. um,
I feel like you
so
need a
yeah,
place for people to submit their Animons from their games
that
too.
would be awesome. Yeah,
So
I
like
mean,
you could like show them off or see them, or maybe like a contest where they like get the winner gets turned into art or something.
yeah, that would be brilliant. Well, I will say, like, uh, if anyone does any artwork of their characters or creates Animon, like please link me on Twitter, and I would love to see that. I've had a couple of people do that, and it's really awesome. I love that. I'm not particularly experienced at art myself, so I always appreciate seeing other people with those creations. So
Do
yeah,
you,
if you have any, send them to me on Twitter. I would love it.
do you have any favorite Animon that people have shared with you?
Oh, it's difficult to remember now. I struggle to remember any particulars that people have sent, but in particular, I really like. I did ask on Twitter a while back, like what combination of classification and element people would immediately go to, and it's interesting how people very have these very strong, like they lean very much towards one particular type. So the classification, as I mentioned, is like beast or insect or machine is one of them, or different things like that. And then your element is like fire, water, nature, earth, all of those. And people will quite often they'll just have a combination that they immediately go to, and they're like, yeah, that speaks to me. Which I think is one of the fun things of creating your character in this, is like choosing your favorite type to go with. So I always like hearing about people's characters that they've made. There was a couple of the streams that have happened. People came up with their own Animon. Someone came up with I think it was either a machine and water or like an aquatic, and it was like a crab that was made out of plate armor and had like a knight's plume on top and like a sword as one of the claws and stuff like that, which I thought was a really good one.
Oh, I like that. I've played several Beastmaster Rangers that have had giant crab companions, so
Yeah, I love a crab. Yeah,
I'm
you
a
can't
fan.
go
I
wrong
mean,
with a crab.
plus crabs are the most fun beast companion to role play. I mean, you don't have to make any sounds. You just got to do the
You
pincher
just
thing.
got to
You're
do
good.
this. Yeah, yeah. I like that a lot.
Crab claws are very expressive. I mean, it
I
usually expresses anger, but very expressive and grumpiness.
I remember back where when I was playing World of Warcraft in the old days. I would go out of my way to find like the most obscure beast companion that was actually tameable by the hunter, because a lot of the monsters you just couldn't tame, but like you'd find like turtles or crabs that you could tame. I would really like finding the weirdest one that you could have as your companion.
Nice. So, do you have any plans to move away from Animon and do other systems or other games, or do you
uh,
want to kind of just stay in this world and play here?
I think I think it'll be a bit of both. I think that the reception that has been so great to Animon Story, and I feel like it's managed to carve out a bit of a niche. You know, I'd really like it to be like if someone wants to play a game where they have their monster companion, I would really like Animon Story to just be able to be there and like accommodate anyone who wants to do that in their tabletop role playing game. So I'm very keen to keep supporting it. Like I said, with adventures or with setting guides, maybe releasing new kid types, or releasing like a bestiary type thing with lots of different animon in it, with stats and plot hooks and things like that. So I'm very keen to keep it up, because I've definitely gotten the impression that there's people out there who have been looking for something like this, like myself. So I'd really like to keep it up. But now that I've made something individually and released something independently, I'm definitely keen to do other things in the future. Um, as well as I've done some freelance work. I've recently done some writing for the upcoming Dark Crystal role playing game,
Ooh,
which
who's
is
putting that out?
that's River Horse Games,
Okay.
which is a UK based company. They did the Labyrinth one as well, Labyrinth adventure game a couple of years ago, which I wrote a tiny bit of, and then I was able to write a fair bit of this Dark Crystal role playing game. Which, if you like the Dark Crystal, particularly the Netflix series which came out a little while ago, um, I mean, I would say, even if you don't have any interest in the Dark Crystal, this role playing game is going to be really cool. So it's definitely worth checking out when it comes out. Um, so
I'm,
yeah. Sorry,
I was
go
just gonna
ahead.
say, I'm always curious because like some designers will create a thing and then like they'll just like double down and just keep working on that thing and like it's never really done. Which I
Yeah,
mean, there's no like right or wrong. It's just a personal
yeah,
preference.
yeah, yeah,
And I know other designers are like, no, I did that game. Now I'm going to do something else, and it's all about like how can I create new mechanics? How can I? They're more like tinkerers.
yeah. I think um, there's an odd thing for me, which is that for quite a few years, all of the RPG writing I did was either adventure modules or like source books for things. And I never wrote like the base mechanics of systems until Animon Story. So it was quite a struggle for me, actually, the first time really having to build something from the ground up. And I was very happy with how it came out. But I think I do quite enjoy writing supplemental material for systems as well. So I'm not in particular the sort of person who's going to go, oh no, I'm bored of this now, I'm going to create an entire new thing from scratch. On top of that, Animon Story and the genre that it sits in is just something that's always been a massive joy of mine. So it's definitely something that I'm going to keep kind of talking about and making things for. So yeah, it's going to stick around hopefully.
It's a fun idea. I like it, and also it's fun because I've kind of seen it done similarly, but from the idea that kids are going to play the game, and this
Sure.
is from the idea that it seems like it's more for adults. I mean, it could work for anybody, but you're thinking
Yeah,
about yourself playing it as you made it more
I would
so.
say, yeah, I've been wary about like doing any of the promotional stuff for it,
Yeah,
saying it's for kids, because I think there's a chance that someone could look at it and go, this is too complicated for a child.
yeah.
And I would say that I think if you were a bit more confident, you could certainly present it to kids and run it for a group of kids. But maybe if a kid picked up the book themselves and tried to run it, it might be a bit too overwhelming.
Well, in your defense, there are plenty of people who are playing D&D with kids,
That's
and
true.
D&D
Yeah,
is not a simple
that's true.
system.
I would say if your kids can play D&D, they should be able to play this, no problem, because
Yeah.
mechanically it's more straightforward, I would say. And as I said, like a lot of the things are stuff that you can make up yourself and just write on your character sheet. So kids should probably be fine at that, making
Yeah.
up things. So yeah, I think it has a mixed appeal there. It's interesting because when I was originally looking for a game before I designed Animon Story, I wanted to run a game with kids and monsters, inspired by Digimon and Pokemon, which I love. And quite a lot of the fan games that I saw online took a much more like simulation approach, like they were translating game mechanics into an TTRPG, or they were trying to apply it to a kind of D&D D20 system, which I didn't think quite clicked properly for this sort of thing, at least the way I saw it. And I was much more interested in kind of having the feel of the genre rather than specifically translating battle mechanics from Pokemon into a TTRPG or something like that. So that's why I ended up making something for myself rather than adapting anything else.
Well, I always think it's cool when someone's like, I see a need for this, or I want to do a specific thing, and I looked for it and I couldn't find it, so I'm just gonna make it.
Yeah.
And,
uh, it's
and
always brilliant. And genuinely, as I've made this, I've become a lot more involved specifically with like indie creators on Twitter and on Itch, the website as well, which is very heavily like indie kind of creations. And there are so many games that people have created, so many supplements and these unique little ideas that people have come up with. Sometimes only a few pages, but there's so much like fun stuff contained in those indie games. I'd highly recommend for anyone to kind of go out and have a look at some of the indie stuff which is available, because there's really just anything you can imagine, or almost anything.
yeah, I mean, I always find it odd when someone's like first inclination is just to make it on their own instead of looking to see what's out there. Just because I always feel like it's everything's been done right, and then someone will come
Yeah.
along and they'll do something that hasn't been done before, and they're like, "Oh, that's really cool." And it's usually because it's like, well, I couldn't find what I was looking for, or I didn't think anything was doing it particularly well, so
Well,
I wanted to take
yeah.
a shot at it.
I mean, to me, it just shows me like how different everyone's specific tastes are in games. Because, I mean, for this one, for Animon Story, it's kind of that subgenre of monster taming or whatever that is it's a pretty niche. And so I was not too surprised that there wasn't like a really big game that was doing it the way I wanted it done. But even if you look at like a more classic fantasy questing type RPG, I mean, there's so many available, and all of them are like someone has gone, oh, I want it to be a bit more like this, or like I want it to be this specific version of that kind of fantasy. Which is, I mean, it's really cool because there's so many different takes on it that you can find out there. So yeah, I think there's always room for more creativity, and chances are that your specific iteration of whatever you're thinking of hasn't been done exactly the way you are imagining it.
So, are you running any campaigns right now?
Right now, I'm actually not, which is quite surprising for me. Like I spent a really long time running multiple campaigns at once. At the moment, I'm playing in a couple. I'm playing in a D&D 5th edition game, which is sort of once a month. I'm playing in one or two other things which are fairly sporadic. But actually, the next thing that I'm running myself is going to be Animon Story, which is
Makes sense.
yeah. I mean, I spent all this time wishing for a game like this and then actually making a game like this. So it's about time that I got around to actually making it, playing it rather. So yeah, I'm going to be having fun playing Animon Story in a home game, and really
Now,
getting to go through it.
when you start that, and is it good? You're going to run it as like a campaign?
Yeah, I think so. I've played it a few times through playtesting. I've run it for a couple of different groups here and there. I've managed to play it a couple of times, but all mainly one shots. And whilst that is great fun, the thing about Animon Story is because a lot of the growth is built into the evolving monsters that you unlock as you go along, or like the character growth and development as you go through. I think that it really it doesn't show all of its its qualities in a one-shot sort of scenario. So I'm very excited to play through literally level 1 to the max level and go through every stage and unlock everything in order as it's sort of intended to be played through a whole campaign, because I haven't done that so far, and I think that a lot of the fun of creating those evolutions and stuff doesn't come out until you've actually played a longer campaign in it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
So do you have an idea how you're going to run your campaign? Like what kind of game you want it to be?
I've started talking about this with the group that I'm playing with.
Has the creator given you enough tools to make the game you want to make?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see. I think ultimately I will probably end up doing like a session zero, and we'll come up with lots of details for the world as we create the characters. Because I really like hearing what players come up with as well when they're making their characters and add stuff to the world. Um, but we've talked about because one of the I don't think I mentioned earlier, one of the other sort of things that the game does specify about the setting is that there are two worlds. There's the human world and the Animon world, and there's no definition about what that is. Which again, it could be like cyberspace, or it could be another planet, or it could be a fairy tale dimension or whatever. But that allows you to either have adventures where Animon are kind of coming into the human world, and the kids are like defending their hometown from invading monsters or something like that, or you can have a campaign where your kids get thrown off into the Animon world and have to figure out what's going on or how to get home or something like that. Which I think chatting with the group, we're going to start off with the kids in the Animon world thrown into the deep end, and then maybe have them come back to the human world later on if they make their way back. But that's quite a cool sort of thing that you could change up for your own personal setting.
I guess like when I do my session zeros, what I like to do is I like to throw out like 4 options, like usually about 4 options, and be like, and like any of these are kind of tweakable. But I feel like it's really important as the GM to make sure that you're giving options that you actually want to be involved with, and not be like, I'm just going to do whatever my players want. And it's like, dance, monkey, dance.
Sure. I think it's massively important to remember that, as a GM, you are still there to play a game and have fun. So like you want to be involved in something that is partly yours. I like to find a balance between bringing everything as the GM and then obviously just leaving it all up to the players. I think there's a nice balance to be struck, and I that's why probably I ended up writing the kind of campaign section of the rule book to like help a group all together kind of ask questions about your setting and come up with things as a group, so that then everyone feels invested in what's being created and everyone has some ownership over the story and the world that's going on.
So part of that is built into the rulebook?
Yeah, there's it's not strictly something you have to do when you create your characters, but there is a full section of like, if you are in your session zero, here's some questions to ask about the world, and it's mainly split into 4. It asks you where the kids live, and whether that's modern day, whether it's a totally fantasy world, whatever. It asks you where Animon come from, and how well known they are. Like if more like in Pokemon, where everyone in the world knows about Pokemon and everyone has their own Pokemon companion, or most people do anyway. Or whether it's like this secret thing where the kid characters are going to be the only ones who know what's going on, and everyone else is going to be pretty much clueless. And it helps you build up those kind of things into your setting so that everyone knows the context of the world when they start playing, so that you can then create characters that fit into that as a group, which is quite good. And then all of the characters themselves have relationships to the other characters built into their characters as well, so that helps just tie the group together as well.
I was going to ask about that. It's definitely like something that's more modern in design, but I like it a lot. Like when I'm running a Monster of the Week game, and that's like one of my favorite things to do, is connecting the characters before you start. It just makes a better foundation.
It is quite a modern thing, and I often think that's quite surprising because it's such a great way of tying together your player characters. And And Monster of the Week is a good example, yeah, because you ask questions to the other players, don't you? In that one, you're
Yeah.
like, "What's one thing that your character knows about mine that no one else does?" or something like that, as an example. And Animon Story has, between the kid types, has set relationships. Obviously, that are just examples. You could create your own, but it'll be like, the delinquent type and the bookworm type will have a relationship suggested that you can pick up and use,
Are
or
there
the
any
jock and the blah, blah.
are there any dynamics between the Animon, like I don't know, like a water type and a fire type may be they're naturally inclined to not get along or whatever.
There's not as sort of strict a relationship thing between the Animon. They do get to choose a nature, which is like their personality, and it has kind of two sides. So it might be careful would be a nature, but then one side of that is that you are quite sensible, but another side might be that you are you don't take action quick enough or something like that, or you're too fearful of things, or something like that. So they have personalities like that, kind of double-sided personalities. And then as well as that, it's there's a suggestion in the book that you might want to make your Animon character have quite an opposing personality to your kid character, so that they kind of bounce off each other a little bit rather than being very similar.
Mm.
But that's definitely something that's left up to players to come up with as well, if they want to.
It sounds like a lot of fun, and I'm definitely interested in checking it out at some point. And honestly, I generally don't like games where you play kids, but this one has me intrigued.
I think it's something that not everyone is interested in doing. And again, you could play this with adult characters and just make that part of your world. That's absolutely fine. But I think as I said, the reason why it's presented in this is just to really like draw inspiration and emulate those kind of classic 90s things.
Have you seen the Netflix movie? Or no, it's not a movie. It was a series called Happy.
Oh no, I haven't actually. No, I've heard of it.
Look it up. Just look it up, and
I will.
And like some trailers or whatever. And it would definitely be a very adult and dark way to take a game like this, and it just popped into my head thinking of like other ways to use it. But we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head out?
Well, I hope anyone sort of listening has enjoyed hearing a bit about Animon Story. I'm very happy to have been invited on. Thanks very much. And if you are interested, you can check it out at animonstory.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Zach Baru. I've got Animon Story in my name as well, so it's hard to miss. And yeah, if you like the sound of it, check it out. There's a free play kit that you can download as well, which has slightly simplified rules. You can download that for free and check it out. And then I hope you've gotten a good taste of what the game is all about and the kind of inspirations it's drawing from. And cool.
Well, we have links in the description for everyone to check out. Zach, I want to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's been great chatting with you about your game. Thanks for sharing it with us. And everyone else, until next time, stay nerdy.
Bye-bye.